Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1993 comedy Mrs. Doubtfire. Now, Mrs. Doubtfire is one of my favorites. I grew up watching this film on VHS along with other Robin Williams films like Hook, Flubber, Aladdin, Jack. So this is one that I definitely have a fair amount of nostalgia for, but it's not just nostalgia that is why this film has still held up really well over the years. This is just a great comedy. It's and honestly a really solid story overall with some great messages, some good laughs, and a lot of other elements about it that are definitely far above average, if you ask me. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on the film, I would like to give a special shout out to Bronson for requesting this review. And if there is another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. A link to both is in the video description down below, and I'll try to get your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Mrs. Doubtfire is directed by Chris Columbus, and this is during his prime. So he had directed Home Alone before this and Home Alone 2, and he was really starting to hit his stride as a director. So this is, in my opinion, still some of his best work. This is a movie that in a lot of ways is kind of a hard sell because of the fact that it's a serious family drama at points about divorce, but then it's also a zany comedy featuring Robin Williams dressing in drag as this nanny, Mrs. Doubtfire. So you need to really find the right balance and tone visually as a director, and also just find a way to just make this all work. And I definitely do feel that Chris did that and then some. When it comes to the comedy scenes, when they were there, they were really funny. They were definitely shot with a fair amount of energy and life to them that matched Robin's own energy that he brought to the screen. And when it comes to the more dramatic scenes, it was also really effective. So I think Chris did a really good job directing this, and utilized some really nice looking pans and zooms at points. There were some wide shots that I felt were definitely pretty strong. There was also some tighter, more up close shots that were also utilized pretty well when it comes to the direction by Columbus. And Columbus is also very flexible when it comes to other ways when it comes to his direction. So he wasn't just a director who was kind of rigid and kind of stuck in their ways. Like, he would shoot scenes the way that the script said to shoot them, and then he would allow Robin Williams, his enigmatic, incredibly talented star, to just play around in front of the camera. It got to the point where they ran out of film on more than one occasion, but as a result, you have some of the funniest moments in the movie, and they are really due to Chris's willingness to just let Robin improv and give him the space to do so. So, yeah, I can't sing enough praises when it comes to Chris Columbus's direction. I think he was absolutely the right man for the job when it comes to this movie. And he's a big reason why this film, in my opinion, still continues to get so much praise to this day because of how well he shot this film and how well he ultimately handled everything when it comes to being the man behind the camera and behind the bulk of the production, and also being somebody who was heavily involved in the casting process, who was also involved in other aspects of the film. Chris Columbus is definitely somebody who really understood the assignment and not only delivered a fine job as a director, but ultimately a fantastic one. Now, the film is co-written by Randy Mayhem Singer and Leslie Dixon. Now, Leslie Dixon, prior to this, she wrote Overboard with Goldie Hawn. She also wrote Outrageous Fortune. And after Mrs. Doubtfire, she also wrote the script for the Freaky Friday remake with Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan. Now, her co-writer, Randy Mayhem Singer, she didn't really do a whole lot after this, even though it was a massive hit. She did some TV work. She also wound up writing the Tooth Fairy film with The Rock. So I think, honestly, more than likely, Leslie Dixon is more responsible for this script's best elements. But I still have to give Randy credit because she was also one of the writers. The screenplay is based on a book called Madame Doubtfire by author Anne Fire. Actually, it's Anne Fine. Now, this is a adaptation that's pretty different from the source material. The book is a lot more dramatic, but this still has its dramatic elements. And honestly, I think the dramatic elements of this script are so well done and so realistic and so personal and relatable that I really do feel that that's one of the main things why this film honestly leaves such a lasting impression. It's because of the fact that it's willing to have a serious discussion about divorce and about what that does to a family dynamic, as well as other things throughout the movie. But a lot of the serious discussions and elements of drama are specifically about that and other things like communication between people in a relationship. So I think that is definitely something that really adds an extra layer to this script that a lot of other 90s comedies didn't necessarily have because, they're just over the top and just full of one liners and gags. And this has something about it that just makes it feel more real, despite how absurd and high concept the idea is. And it helps ground the film. And I think that's a really good idea in terms of grounding it more in reality, despite the unrealism of it. This guy who just gets this really professional looking makeup mask and convincingly is able to pull off this disguise as this old housekeeper. It's definitely the kind of thing where if you look at it without really seeing the movie, you would think, okay, this is going to be dumb and this isn't going to work. And like, how could anybody buy this? But the way that the script handles it, it really works. And I think it helps that it starts out really introducing the characters in a personable and relatable fashion. It starts out introducing you to Daniel, and he's doing this voiceover stuff for this cartoon, and then it just doesn't really work out, and he quits because he's not willing to continue to do a voiceover that sends the wrong message for the kids in terms of promoting smoking, which is something that actually ties into what he ultimately does as a career by the end of the movie when he's working for educational purposes, which I think is just a sign of a really good script because it starts out with him standing by his convictions and then losing work as a result of it. And it honestly puts him in a serious bind when it comes to the divorce proceedings and the custody battle with him and his wife over his kids. But then it ultimately allows him to uh, use his convictions and then become an educational figure in the vein of Mr. Rogers, with Miss Doubtfire and her own show by the end of the story. So I think that's just a really, really great way to start things out to get you to understand the kind of person that Daniel is. But it also shows how flawed he is with this chaotic birthday party with all these animals, and how that completely blows up in his face and embarrasses his wife. And then ultimately is the final straw when it comes to their relationship breaking apart. And I love that dynamic. It's really interesting and it's really compelling because it's like, oh, hey, he's this guy who's standing up for his convictions during this voiceover session, but he's also this guy who's honestly somebody who's not willing to grow up in other ways. It shows the complexities of his character. Now, I do feel that Miranda, the way that she's written, she's like a little harsh here. Like she never really did communicate with him until she talked to him when he was in drag as Mrs. Doubtfire. But that's only because she thought she was just talking to this other woman and not directly to Daniel. So that was definitely something that made me really sympathize with Daniel because I'm like, okay, yeah, he screwed up and he did this whole party and it was too big and it was a hassle, but he technically did have plans to clean everything up, and you really did come home from work early. So it's just one of those, and she has this continual kind of thing that she does with him. She comes home from work early and then sees everything because the nosy neighbor called her and told her about the party. Then she winds up trying to pick up the kids early, an hour early, because she showed up and dropped them off late when Daniel was having his visitation rights with his kids. So there's certain things about her that are also flawed too, which I also really liked because it showed that, hey, it's not just a one-way street thing. It's not just Daniel, the husband, is the immature flake and he's the one that's doing everything wrong. It shows that, hey, Miranda's also not necessarily doing things the right way either. And it really does show in a lot of ways what leads to divorce is that they just aren't working together. They are not really bringing out the best in each other anymore. And so I like that. It's not particularly that funny. I will give it that because it's more serious and kind of sad, because of the whole thing with the divorce and seeing how it affects the kids, but it really adds a lot of heart and a genuine soul to the script and to the story. So then when you get to the Mrs. Doubtfire antics, those actually carry more weight as a result. And I think a lot of this script and a lot of its success is not necessarily solely due to the comedy and how funny of an idea it is to see Robin Williams in drag. It's also due to just a genuinely compelling story with a good arc for its characters and a very realistic depiction of divorce for a family movie. Daniel, he's struggling at this point because the divorce is final and he's lost custody of his kids and he's got to have these visitation sessions. He only gets to see his kids every Saturday, and he's got to get a job. He's got to clean up his act. And he finds out that his wife, Miranda, is looking for a housekeeper. And so initially he tries to offer his services, but she doesn't trust him. So then he changes some things with the number that she was going to put in the paper, and he starts calling her as these different housekeepers. And that is definitely one of the funnier moments of the script for sure. And I'm pretty sure a good chunk of that is probably Robin Williams just riffing. I am Job. Stuff like that. Like, I doubt that a lot of that was in the script. That's probably a lot of Robin Williams improvisation there. And he just sets it up where Miranda will be beaten down so much by these just terrible applicants that she's hearing over the phone, which are all played by Daniel, by the way. And she's going to accept this Mrs. Doubtfire, which is a character that he has to actually come up with on the fly. And he looks at a newspaper and sees something that says fire and doubt. And then he's like, oh, Doubtfire. And he gets the job. But now he's got to realize, now he realizes, oh, shit, I got the job, but I'm not some housekeeper lady. So he goes to his brother, who's gay, who's also a makeup effects artist, which I thought was really cool. His brother Frank, and asks Frank for help, and he's like, "Make me a woman." And then they do the whole montage of him trying on these different disguises. One, it's almost like a Hispanic type of character with long red nails, but that just doesn't work. Then another one is like some kind of old grandma from Fiddler on the Roof. Makes some reference to some kind of Jewish dish, which is like I think that's like Goebbels or something. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's something that I did not get the context of. But then I looked it up later, and now that I know the context, it's actually a really funny line. So it's the kind of thing that I think if you're not Jewish, you're probably not gonna get it. But like if you look at the context of that line that he said, it's 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 uh it's hilarious actually. Um and he even does this bit where he dresses as Barbara Streisand and does a little musical number, but that's not gonna work. And then he settles upon the makeup and the disguise that he ultimately uses for the rest of the movie. Now, this is actually a disguise that Robin used and tested out in public. He went to this sex shop, this like adult bookstore, in makeup and in character, and he brought up like a I think it was like a double-sided a dildo and some other things to the counter. And the guy behind the desk, he recognized that it was Robin Williams in makeup, and so Robin didn't buy the sex toys, but he was convincing enough that no one else in the store really noticed. So he realized, okay, I think this is gonna work. This whole makeup and this whole idea, and when you see it, it's quite effective. You can see why it won an Oscar for best makeup effects for Greg Kinnear. Uh, I think it's Vay Neal and Dick Smith, who also worked on the makeup effects for this. I really love how they don't show the makeup right away, though. So you see the reactions of Daniel's brother and his partner, and they're like, "Oh, it's so good, it's great. You could be my, mother, like something like that." And you don't actually see it right away. I thought that was a really nice touch. So he gets the job, shows up at a meeting with his wife as Mrs. Doubtfire, and you get the kind of stuff that you would expect from a movie featuring a housekeeper. Trying to whip the kids into shape, and you get a lot of the gags that you would expect from like a guy in drag, but it's done in a way that, in my opinion, wasn't completely tasteless or offensive. And honestly, I think it was rather clever most of the time. I mean, the whole bit where Mrs. Doubtfire is cooking dinner and she doesn't know how to do anything. Just Daniel is just a complete klutz in the kitchen, has no clue at what he's doing, and then winds up lighting his chest on fire. That scene still cracks me up just thinking about it. To be honest, it's so funny. And just Robin's line that he says after he puts himself out. I've been a woman for a day and I'm already having hot flashes. I mean, just it's just so funny, and because it's just Robin just coming up with just one zinger after another. I think that was one of the lines he improvised, and a lot of the funniest gags, that bit improvised by Robin, wasn't in the script. The whole bit with the run by fruiting, that's totally improvised by Robin. Of course, the voice of Mrs. Doubtfire is all Robin. So, and I love how there's like a lot of things when it comes to Mrs. Doubtfire's conversations with with Miranda, when Stu is now in the picture, and Daniel's jealous, so he's trying to set things up where she will drop Stu, so there's still hope for him and Miranda, and he's coming up with these outrageous things, like talking about how you need to be celibate if your husband's no longer in the picture. Uh, you need to um, just not necessarily trust this guy. You know, he's good looking, but overcompensates with his car and all this other stuff. He's probably not doing as well down there. There's a lot of stuff, these exchanges, these little snipes that Daniel does at Stu's expense, that as a kid I did not get and did not understand the context of. As an adult, I get it, and it's really funny. Uh, a great example of that is during the dinner scene. Mrs. Doubtfire and Stu are alone together, and Mrs. Doubtfire is just saying all these different euphemisms and all these different descriptions of having sex. And I didn't understand any of that. It just sounded funny. But as an adult, I'm like, oh my God, like that is just a bunch of double entendres, one after another, as this sweet old lady who's talking about all these different sex acts, and then talking about how Miranda has crabs, and like it's laugh out loud hilarious. So there are definitely a fair amount of moments in this that are really, really funny. But there's also a lot of heart to it. And I think that is really one of the most important things when it comes to this story, is how heartfelt it is. Because on more than one occasion, you really do feel for not only Daniel, but you also feel for Miranda, because she's being lied to this entire time. This housekeeper woman who she's bearing her soul to, who she trusts, is just her ex in drag. The whole thing with the kids, you feel for them too. Um, the stuff with Stu, you almost kind of feel bad for him too, because yeah, maybe he is a bit of a dick as he calls Daniel a loser behind his back, but other than that, he doesn't seem like he's that bad of a guy. So there's a lot of things in this where the characters are written in a way where there's not really anybody that like you absolutely despise or you hate seeing on screen and you don't want to see any more of. And so that definitely does add to the whole just enjoyable aspect of this story. It makes the comedy so much more fun too, because it's just a fun uh, uh, atmosphere and just a fun overall vibe for everything that's unfolding, despite the fact that it's kind of serious and honestly kind of messed up when you think about it. This uh, ex husband, he dresses up as a woman and gets a job as a housekeeper so he can still be around his kids and get around the issues with the custody battle. uh yeah, that is kind of messed up, but the way it's written, it makes it work though, because Daniel shows humility, and he gets this opportunity to ultimately quit his dead-end job as this guy who's shipping film containers to actually becoming an entertainer for kids. And initially, his plan is probably just to do it as himself, but he's forced to think on the fly during the dinner table sequence or dinner sequence, not really just a dinner table sequence. And because of the fact that he's just so sloshed drunk, because of all the scotches he's been drinking, he realizes, okay, this Mrs. Doubtfire persona, I'm going to use this and I'm going to make that into the lead of this educational show that I'm pitching to this producer. And it actually turns out to be a big hit in the end. And I really like how that whole dinner sequence is constructed. It's really funny. You have the stuff with the jambalaya and the spice, and you have the multiple different scenes of Daniel going into the women's restroom, uh, as Mrs. Doubtfire, taking the makeup off, putting the Daniel clothes on, then going back, to meet with the producer, then leaving, then going back as Mrs. Doubtfire, and just each time that he just goes back and forth, it just gets more and more chaotic. It's some really great writing, to be honest. And then ultimately the reveal and the humiliation and the embarrassment of that. And then the fallout of that too. And then to show the scene where he ultimately loses his kids. He actually fully loses the custody battle at this point. In this very heart-wrenching courtroom scene, which features this really great speech that Daniel has when he talks about his kids and how much they mean to him. And you're just honestly really feeling so much for Daniel at this point. Your heart goes out to him and to the kids, and ultimately he has this big popular kids show and the Mrs. Doubtfire show with this puppet, and he winds up being able to really get his wife to warm up to him again at this point and start to trust him again. And she and the kids are watching the show every week, and they see one that really speaks to them, and they really enjoyed it. And that leads to Miranda going to the set and speaking to Daniel, and Daniel is trying to get her to allow him to, you know, still be a part of these kids' lives, and not have all the visitation limits and all this other stuff. And they talk about how, things were better when Mrs. Doubtfire was there. And I like the ending. It's rather sweet. It's bittersweet if when you really think about it. But I really love the way that this story ends, because it shows that both Miranda and Daniel are willing to put their differences aside. They admit that they were mean and nasty towards one another equally, and they realize the error of that, and then they decide to make amends. And no, they're not necessarily getting back together, but Miranda's allows Daniel to be a housekeeper again, but just as himself for the kids for a few hours every day, and removes the restrictions that were put on him by the court. And then you have this last scene from the Mrs. Doubtfire show, where Mrs. Doubtfire talks about this letter that she received from this girl who was talking about her parents getting divorced. And honestly, I'm getting a little choked up thinking about it, because it was just so well written, so well done. The message is just so strong about how there's all different types of families. There are families that have more than one mommy and daddy. There are families that feature kids who are being raised by their aunt and their uncle or their grandparents. Divorce doesn't necessarily have to be this really bad, ugly, awful things. Sometimes two people just don't get along anymore, and it's better for them to be apart. But that doesn't mean that your family is dead. It doesn't mean that your family is gone. So I really felt that that was something that really definitely resonated with me. It shows you that there are a lot of different dynamics when it comes to families, and it's not just one thing over the other. And I just thought that message was just so great, especially for kids. I think that there's a reason why I think a lot of kids who saw this really stuck with them. And it's not just, oh, it's funny and Robin Williams and throwing fruit and whatever, but I think that message about how, hey, divorce isn't the end of the world. Like your family is still there. Your mom and your dad still love you. And it's not necessarily always this mean and ugly thing. I think that's really something that has a genuinely timeless quality to it when it comes to its message. So, yeah, I don't know exactly who is responsible for the strengths of this script, but whoever it is, they deserve a round of applause, if you ask me, because this is a really strong screenplay, in my opinion. Now, of course, you can't have a strong script with strong direction without an equally strong cast, and Mrs. Doubtfire is no exception. I mean, you got Robin Williams as Daniel, Mrs. Doubtfire. He is just in rare form here. He's great as Daniel. He's also equally as great as Mrs. Doubtfire. He's as funny as ever. The whole scene when he's just dancing with the vacuum and with the broom, like that cracks me up every time. And that's not even a scene that features any dialogue. It's just Robin in drag just messing around. And there's just a lot to love about Robin's performance in this. Just how he's able to show the dramatic moments with the arguments and the petty disagreements with him and his wife and the courtroom scenes, and then also, you know, the zany stuff with Mrs. Doubtfire and him just thinking on the spot and on the fly with the whole meringue scene and all of this other stuff, the dinner sequence, and just having to just be juggling all these different things all at once, and sometimes playing this other character at the same time. Uh, that is definitely something that is quite impressive. And I can't see Tim Allen or any of the other people they had in mind to play this role really be able to pull it off as well as Robin did. Because that's just how good Robin is. He's so good at doing that, being spontaneous and having these improv moments and just being able to be this pinball who's just going back and forth with his characters. Sally Field was also fantastic as Miranda, definitely one of her better performances in my opinion. She was great when it comes to the moments when it was supposed to be a little more comedic, but she was also equally as good when it comes to the moments where it's more of a serious sort of drama. The moment when she sees that she's getting custody of the kids in court, but here's the speech that Daniel gave, and really has this emotional conflict on her face. It's really some great stuff without her even saying a single line of dialogue. Pierce Brosnan is fun as Stu, especially when it comes to the scenes when he's just having to put up with Miss Doubtfire and Daniel, who's just constantly putting him down, or getting fruit thrown at his head. Harvey Fierstein was a lot of fun as Frank, Daniel's brother. Polly Holiday is only in it for a couple scenes as Gloria, but she makes the most out of them. And then the kids, like they were great. Lisa Jakub as Lydia, Matthew Lawrence as Christopher, Mara Wilson as Natalie, and then Robert Prosky, who played Mr. Lundy. I really loved his bit part in this. I felt him and Robin had this great chemistry when it comes to the scenes that they shared in this. So, really good cast. And it's got some really nice, picturesque, uh, solid uh, cinematography by Donald McAlpine. The editing by Raja Gosnell was also great. The music by Howard Shore is a bit schmaltzy, but it fits for the movie and the tone. But a lot of people aren't really necessarily remembering the score for this. They're remembering the songs like Dude Looks Like a Lady by Aerosmith and the other different songs that were chosen for the soundtrack. It is a long film, but I never really felt like it was that boring because I was very compelled and drawn into the story and its characters. Yeah, I really enjoy it. I think Mrs. Doubtfire is very much a classic, and if you haven't seen it for whatever reason, I definitely would recommend it. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.